participated in Choose to Move. Hop on to our website and learn more about how you can access a program in your community. So our Move and Connect webinar series brings together over 6,700 program participants and those who engage with older adults in communities. So you're part of a pretty big collective across BC. And these webinars are meant for you. So in our post-event survey, if there's a topic that you really want us to cover, let us know, and we're happy to curate that lineup for you. I also want to acknowledge our amazing Choose to Move delivery partners, the BC Recreation and Parks Association, the YMCA, so many neighborhood houses here in the Lower Mainland, and other senior serving organizations across the province. I'm glad that many of you are joining us on the webinar today. And I also want to acknowledge our funders, the BC Ministry of Health and the New Horizons program for seniors. Of course, I also want to acknowledge our founders and key collaborators at the Active Aging Research Team, led by Drs. Heather McKay and Joni Sims-Gould. So without further ado, I want to welcome Morgan Donahue, our speaker today, who has generously put together a really thoughtful presentation for you. Morgan is a support and education coordinator with the Alzheimer Society of BC, based here on the North Shore. And she has a background in psychology, in counseling, and in gerontology. She's had experience working on the ground in community services for seniors, as well as a researcher with the gerontology department at Simon Fraser University. Welcome, Morgan, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate the chance to be here with you all virtually today. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Morgan, and I am one of many support and education coordinators with the Alzheimer Society of BC's First Link program, which some of you may have been in contact with before. And I'm so happy to be here virtually to share more about how we can keep our brains healthy and engaged. But before we begin, I'd also like to respectfully acknowledge that the Alzheimer Society of BC operates on traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of Indigenous peoples in all regions of British Columbia. And as Sarah mentioned, today I'm presenting to you from our North Shore Resource Center, situated on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. So today's workshop is an introductory exploration on the topic of brain health. And as Sarah mentioned, I'll be sure to share some links to our website and where you can find more opportunities to learn and participate in upcoming webinars, as well as recorded videos from our past webinars. So here's what we're going to be covering today. And I was so overwhelmed and appreciative of all the questions that came in beforehand. And we'll for sure have some time at the end of the session to answer a few of them related to brain health that are within my scope to answer. And I'll make sure that you know where to go to get help or to ask more questions at another time. There will also be some opportunities to share some of your experiences, ideas, and thoughts in the chat box, as Sarah mentioned. And there's many of us here today, but it's nice to learn from each other in the small ways that we can. So please feel free to share your ideas when prompted in the chat so we can have a little bit more of exploration together. My hope is that you will come away from today's session with a bit more of an understanding of the brain and body connection and what you can do to support your brain health. After all, what is good for your body is also good for your brain. And most importantly, I really hope that through learning what risk factors are modifiable and how to make some changes in our lives, you'll be empowered to implement some of the strategies to promote brain health. So let's dive right in. So what is a healthy brain? We know that a healthy brain functions across several areas. It is not just one thing. A healthy brain manages how well we think, problem solve, plan, learn, and remember. It will accurately coordinate movement and balance. It will tell our heart to beat and our legs to walk, or our legs to run if we're running late for the bus. It will manage different emotions and enable us to feel and respond appropriately to touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. So just as when your hand or your arm very gently grazes an element on a stove, that reflex reaction, that's controlled by our brain. It is 100 billion nerve cells and 1 trillion supporting cells managing every single aspect of life. And despite all that a healthy brain does, many people don't start thinking about their brain health until they notice some cognitive changes and memory loss later on in life. But there are many things that you can do starting as young as childhood and throughout life to keep your brain as healthy as possible throughout your lifetime. We know that intellectual pursuits, social interaction, and perhaps most importantly, physical activity are very helpful in keeping one's brain healthy and sharp. So what do you think naturally changes as we get older? What kinds of changes have you experienced that are normal age-related changes that one might expect? If you'd like to share some responses, please feel free to add your comments and thoughts in the chat box. So what do you think naturally changes as we get older? Sherry shared slower recall, vision, getting more forgetful, memory, perhaps less exercise, changes related to metabolism, hand-eye coordination, reflexes. Lots of really good ideas here, everyone. So this next chart is going to compare some natural aging changes that we may or may not expect as we get older throughout our lifetime that are not necessarily a result of a disease and are just normal to human development. So research confirms that dementia remains one of the top diseases people fear developing. And I can confirm that from my calls with clients and individuals throughout the province, as this question does come up quite a bit. Much of this fear really stems from a lack of understanding about dementia, and many of us may believe that everybody gets dementia if you live long enough. But with more than 500,000 people in the world who are over 100 years of age, it is very clear that that is simply not true. Experiencing dementia is not a normal part of aging. So let's compare changes we can expect to experience as we age to what a person with a progressive degenerative type of dementia might experience. So here's a list of some changes that can be considered a normal part of natural aging. And it's important to note that this slide and the following slide is not a diagnostic tool. So nonetheless, forgetting a conversation from a year ago or forgetting the name of an acquaintance or a colleague that you don't work with every day is pretty typical for a normal aging brain. So is occasionally forgetting events or occasionally having trouble finding the right word. And I'm sure throughout this presentation, I may stumble over my words, and that's okay. We've all had that tip of the tongue experience, you know, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you shout out banana because you were trying to recall the type of cream pie that you had last week, as an example. Does this sound familiar to any of you? I'm sure we've all had those moments where it drives us crazy until we can find that word. So often with these kinds of changes, we experience some worry and we have that awareness, but our family is not concerned. So now let's take a look at the difference between these normal age-related changes and what someone with a progressive dementia might experience. So in contrast, someone living with a form of dementia may forget recent conversations. Many dementias damage the part of the brain that stores memories, which means that conversations, even from the recent past, may not be stored as longer-term memories. And we'll watch a video a little bit later on how memory is created. So in these cases, if you're trying to cue someone or jog their memory with other related facts, that simply will not work because the conversation that you are trying to get that person to remember is simply not stored in the brain. It is essentially as if it never happened for them. So while now natural aging is likely to see us forget names of people who are not part of our daily lives, living with dementia may mean forgetting the name of a close family member or a friend. And you can imagine that this could be a very painful or frightening experience for not only the person living with the cognitive changes, but their friend or family member when this happens. And similarly, if a person's hippocampus, which is the part of the brain involved in learning and memory, if the hippocampus is damaged by dementia and the process of creating those longer term memories is interrupted or prevented, then a person is likely to frequently forget recent events because their brain has absolutely no record for that particular person, as if that event simply did not occur. So one of the more telling changes with many dementias is a significant change in language with frequent pauses and substitutions. With natural aging, we should not see a reduction in our vocabulary. If you have always had a rich and varied vocabulary, that is likely not to change as you age with a healthy brain. You may need a little bit more time to access a specific word, but overall, your facility with language shouldn't change. So processing speed may slow down, but your ability to access that language should be available. In contrast, someone with a progressive degenerative type of dementia is very likely to slowly have their vocabulary shrink and to more frequently be unable to access specific words or substitute for far more generalizations. So for an example, if someone living with dementia were to describe an outing, instead of saying, on Thursday last week, we drove down to Stanley Park and we walked around the seawall, they may say something along the lines of, the other day, we went there and we moved. So it is worth mentioning again that this is not a diagnostic tool. That said, if you're experiencing any of the signs on the right-hand side of the column, it's a good idea to make an appointment with your doctor and outline your specific concerns. If it's helpful for you at this point in time, you're welcome to take a screenshot of this slide so you can speak specifically to why you're concerned and that you're experiencing some things that you feel are not normal age-related cognitive changes. So today's workshop is not going to go too far into depth about dementia, and at the Alzheimer Society we have a lot more opportunities to learn more specifically about dementia and communication and changes in behavior. But it is important, I think, for today's purpose just to give a high-level understanding of what is dementia. So it's also important to note that by adopting some of the strategies that we'll discuss later on, we may be able to reduce our risk of developing dementia in the future. So what is dementia? Dementia itself is not a disease, but rather you can think of it as a broad term or a broad medical term or an umbrella term used to describe a collection or set of symptoms that indicate physiological damage in the brain. So some symptoms may include memory loss and difficulties with thinking, problem solving, or language. And those changes are severe enough to reduce a person's ability to perform their everyday, day-to-day activities. It interrupts their ability to move around with their life. A person with dementia may also experience changes in mood and behavior. It's important to note that dementia is progressive, and this means that the symptoms will gradually increase over time and get worse as more of the brain cells become damaged and eventually lose their function. In British Columbia, it is estimated that 70,000 people are living with one form of dementia or another, and the numbers of individuals who are impacted, whether themselves or through a friend or family member, will continue to rise. So if anyone here is experiencing some of these changes or is supporting or knows somebody who is, you and your family members and friends are not alone, and there is support out there for you. So like I said, we're not going to get too far into the nitty-gritty of what the different types of diseases that cause the dementia symptoms are, but I'd like to just touch on a few. So you may have heard of some of these before, including Alzheimer's disease, vascular dementia, which is usually as a result of a stroke where the blood vessels are damaged or ruptured, mixed dementia, and this is when a person may have one or more types of dementia co-occurring at the same time. So someone may have a stroke and then several years later start to experience symptoms more common related to Alzheimer's disease. Some people develop dementia with Lewy bodies, or frontal temporal disorders, which is a rare group of disorders that primarily affect the frontal and temporal lobes, so the front and side parts of the brain. And those areas of the brain are primarily involved in executive functioning, personality, as well as mood and behavior. And then there's simply the diagnosis of dementia or neurocognitive disorder, where no specific diagnosis has been made to what disease is actually causing the symptoms of dementia. Increasingly, people are receiving this diagnosis, and I just want to say that at the Alzheimer Society, whether or not you have a formal diagnosis or you don't, our support is available and accessible to anybody. So I would like to just, there'll be other opportunities, I'll put it in the chat as well, but I just wanted to put our contact information so that you have it available if you'd like to connect with anybody to talk more about dementia or some of the changes that you're experiencing yourself. So we do have an English language helpline that operates Monday to Friday. I'm just going to put it out here, Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. And we also have language support in Cantonese and Mandarin, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., as well as language support in Punjabi from Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So I just want to put those there. They'll come up again throughout the rest of the presentation, but just in case anyone has to go towards the end and would like to write it down now. So just to quickly sum up, as we move on to talk more about brain health, this is a more sequential way of demonstrating how the various diseases are related to the term dementia. So progressive degenerative diseases, like the ones we mentioned on the last slide, like Alzheimer's disease, cause destructive protein and vascular changes in and around the brain cells. That causes damage to the brain cells and neural pathways in the brain, which leads to the symptoms that we see as part of dementia, including memory loss, confusion and disorientation in time and space, impaired or impacted judgment, communication problems, as well as behavioral changes, among others. It's important to note that Alzheimer's disease and other dementias at this point in time cannot be prevented. We do not know exactly what causes dementia, so we cannot tell anybody how to specifically prevent it. However, research indicates that there are several risk factors associated with developing dementia, and it is likely that dementia develops when there are so many risk factors for a disease that they overwhelm the brain's ability to maintain and repair itself. So risk factors are characteristics of your lifestyle, environment, and your genetic background, and that increase your likelihood of developing a disease. It's important to note that risk factors on their own are not the causes of the disease, but rather you can think of risk factors as representing an increased chance or likelihood, but not a certainty that dementia will develop. Similarly, having little or no known exposure to a risk factor on this list does not necessarily protect an individual from developing a disease. So there's still so much research that's being done to figure out the causes of dementia and how to prevent it. That is a huge area of research, not only in Canada, but all over the world. So some risk factors are modifiable, which is good news, because that means that they can be changed or altered. Other risk factors are non-modifiable, meaning that we cannot change them. So this list shows some of the things that have been identified as risk factors for dementia. So on this list, there are 3 risk factors that are non-modifiable, meaning out of our control. If you'd like to put some information in the chat box, which ones you think might be non-modifiable, then we'll explore the list together on the next slide. So which of these on both the left-hand and right-hand side do you think that are not within our control and we cannot modify? Great. We've got some experts here. Genetics, age. There we go, gender. Thank you so much, everybody. Head injuries. So let's move on to the next slide. So looking at the full list again, but sorted into modifiable and non-modifiable, as you can see, there are only the 3 risk factors that have been identified as being out of our control. So the first is age. We've already discussed the fact that dementia is not a normal part of aging. There are many people who do not develop dementia as they age. And I think we can all think of somebody who's lived into their 90s and potentially even 100s that did not develop the signs and symptoms of dementia. However, age is the strongest known risk factor. The second is gender. And I'm not going to go too much into it, but women are generally at a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, though this is not the case for other types of dementia like frontotemporal dementia. And the research is suggesting that there may be some connection due to estrogen levels. There may be something at play there, as well as the fact that women tend to live longer generally on average. The last is the role that genetics play. And I received some really great questions prior to the event over the past couple of weeks that I had some really great curiosity about the role that genetics play. So genetics has been identified by research as an important risk factor, but one that really only plays a large role in a very small percentage of cases. So less than 5% of cases of Alzheimer's disease have a genetic link to them. So what this means is that there's good news that many of these risk factors for developing dementia are ones that we may have some control over. And that's where this Healthy Brain Workshop is a great way to learn a little bit about some of those ways to keep healthy. Now, some of you may be feeling a little overwhelmed, perhaps, that it is too late for you to make any changes. Perhaps you are feeling too old or too set in your ways, or perhaps thinking that the changes that you will make will not make a difference. But in fact, research on neuroplasticity suggests that our brains never stop being able to make new changes and adaptations. So neuroplasticity is the ability of our brain to adapt to changes in the environment by forming new neural networks and connections over time. So that is, our brains change both functionally and structurally due to experiences we have throughout our lives, even at age 60, even at age 90. Everything we do changes our brains, and that never stops. So even when somebody has an experience of dementia, their brain is still adapting to compensate for the many changes that are occurring in other parts of their brain where there may be damage. However, it's important to note that eventually the physical damage to the brain does become too much for the brain to keep up with when someone is experiencing dementia. So as I mentioned, I'm not as equipped to discuss about how memory works, and it'd be much better to get some visual representations. I find that's often a better way to connect to information. So I do have a very short video, and please let me know if you can hear the sound. It should start, and it will talk about how memory works. It's only about 2.5 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and play it, and hopefully this can give you a better idea of how I'm able to remember what I'm talking about today, or how you're able to remember information from your past. Okay. I hope you all enjoyed that. I find it quite cute and very memorable, and for me to encode this information. And I noticed that someone had asked about a link to the video, and yes, I will put that in the chat. Let me just find it here. And so this particular link will not only connect to this video, but there's other videos that talk more about brain health as well as dementia. So I hope that's helpful for you if you're wanting to share this video or rewatch it again. Good, I'm glad there were no sound problems.
How does your memory work?
Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to read this quote, and I really like it. It goes, "My mind is like my web browser. 19 tabs are open, 3 of them are frozen, and I have no idea where the music is coming from." And I really like this saying, both the reality of the way many of us use our web browsers, including myself, and how much it resonates as an analogy for the mind, and how it can be especially true for a brain and hippocampus that are damaged with dementia, as we saw in that video. As we have talked about, we do have some control when it comes to memory, and brain training can help. For most of us, there are strategies that we can use to help build our memory over time. So before I dive into those strategies, and that will be mostly the rest of our presentation, I'd like to hear from you. What are some strategies that you help to keep your brain healthy and to build your memory? So please feel free to head to the chat to share a little bit about some of your strategies. This is one way that we can learn from each other. Crosswords. There you go. Brush your teeth using your non-dominant hand, and we'll talk about that. Photos of events, rest, exercise, a lot of word games, learning another language, read more, watch less TV, different routines, being honest if you're having issues. These are all really wonderful. Volunteering. I've seen such an increase in volunteer opportunities, but people who are taking up volunteering, especially during COVID, it was just wonderful to see the community come together, and there's lots of ways to get involved. So that's wonderful.
Morgan, I'm just gonna make a quick comment here. I see a number of people have their hands up in the kind of Q&A, or they're using the panel in the bottom there to raise their hand, I think, to pose a question. So I just want to remind folks to hop into the chat and put your question there. I know sometimes the chat is moving really, really quickly. But trust us, if you place your question there, we'll gather it for the Q&A session. So if you can figure out how to lower your hands, you feel free to do that, but we won't be opening up people's audio or video lines during the webinar. Sorry to interrupt there, Morgan, carry on.
No, thank you so much, Sarah. And like I said, if there are other questions that arise throughout or after the presentation, the Alzheimer Society and the Dementia Helpline is a great resource to start asking some of those questions. So we'll make sure that you have that information at the end as well. And yes, there's a lot of participation in the chat, so this is really, really great. Bike riding. Wonderful. You all have some great ideas. So there are several things that we can do to help maintain and build new connections between brain cells, and this may help reduce our risk of getting dementia or developing dementia. So one of the best ways to do this is by learning new things. Our brains love and crave novelty and change. By constantly learning new things and challenging your brain throughout your life, you can help build your cognitive reserve. So for an example, I used to do this presentation in person, and there were usually 10 to 15 people in the room with me. So this has been a new learning challenge for me to deliver the same information, but in a completely different format. I know someone mentioned about learning a new language, so that's a great opportunity to challenge your brain. Signing up for a course online or attending webinars just like the Active Aging Society promotes, or taking up a new hobby are great examples of brain challenging activities. And while crossword puzzles may not provide much novelty if you do them on the regular, they can not only be a fun challenge for your brain, but they can help you to learn new vocabulary as you age. Maybe one of the words you end up figuring out doesn't resonate with you, and so you take a look online to figure out more about that particular event or that word as an example. So maintaining your hobbies and interests is also great because it's not only about new learnings to help keep our brain healthy. It is also important to maintain your existing interests and hobbies. So this can also be part of lifelong learning. Most interests and hobbies can continue to challenge us throughout our lives, and we can almost always learn more or get better at something if we're interested in it. If, as an example, you've been knitting your whole life or playing golf your whole life or whatever activity you feel like you've mastered, perhaps trying to teach that activity to somebody else, you'll be using your brain in a different way as you demonstrate and share your knowledge with someone else. And it's also a great way to connect socially. Being creative and actively on the lookout for things you can do in different ways, as some of you mentioned in the chat, to challenge your brain every day. So for example, break your routine as often as you can. Brush your hair or your teeth, as one participant shared, with your non-dominant hand, or take a different route home when grocery shopping or out on a walk. listen to music and hum the tune or try to identify different instruments. Staying productive is important as well. So especially with COVID, when many of us had our social circles shrink quite a bit as we were staying at home or activities were stopped, I know that was hard to stay socially connected and productive in society. But are there people in your life that you could reach out to and say hi to on a regular basis? Not only does it keep you engaged, but it helps you provide support for them and vice versa. So it's a win-win. So the next two slides will be different brain teasers, and I really enjoy these, so I hope you do too. So on this particular screen right now, there is a drawing of a bus. This is not a trick question, and it does have a real answer, but I'd like for everyone to take a look at the bus and let me know which direction you think it is traveling and why you think it is. Is it going right or is it going left? So I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, but when you're ready, put your answers in the chat box. Some people have said left. Right, but not sure why I feel that way. So a good mix here. Well, so I'm going to share a little bit about the answer. So this, as a research study, when preschool children in the United States are shown this as a brain teaser, often they answer left. And why is that? Well, they say it's because you can't see the door. And if you're having one of those, duh moments, I know I first did when I first started presenting this. But this is a really good way to reflect on how our memory works. So imagine if our memories were perfect and we remembered every single thing about every single day. You might have been able to answer correctly by saying left, by recalling every single image of a bus that you've ever seen, and only the ones traveling left would match. But on the other hand, if we truly remembered every single thing about every single day, it would have taken hours or even days sorting through all those bus-related memories, whether in BC or on a trip overseas. So not being able to remember everything and forgetting some things is exactly what our brains are supposed to do. So here's another one, and this one gets me every time, and I've done it quite a few times. So take a look at the words on the screen, and as you go down the column, starting from the word red, read out the color of the word, not what the word says, so only the color. So I'll give you a couple minutes and try to go through this list as fast as you can, reading what the color is, not the word. See how fast you can do it. Do you stumble over a couple of words? Does the introduction of orange at the end throw you off because it didn't occur earlier? This is called the Stroop color and word test, and it is often used as a neuropsychological test for experimental and clinical purposes, but it can also be a really fun brain training exercise. It tests our processing speed and our ability to recognize when something is incongruent or not quite what our brain is expecting it to be. So the word that you see doesn't match with the color of the word. You might want to say red for the first word, but you're being asked to say the color, which is green. So how did you find this exercise? It's tricky and it can be easy to get mixed up, but it's still a fun way. And if you'd like to try something, try challenging yourself by going in reverse or starting from the word green, which is orange at the bottom. Try different approaches. Many of you are saying you have to do it slowly, and me too. It really is your brain trying to really think about what it is that you're looking to say at that moment. But I imagine that if we did this over and over again, we may get a lot faster with it, and practice may enforce some of those memories of the order of the words and the colors. Slow but steady, yes. So we're going to talk a bit about sleep. So we're going to shift to some other factors at this point. Think about how you feel when you've had a really deep, restorative, restful sleep compared to when you've had a poor sleep. Does anyone want to share in the chat box some of the differences they notice in their functioning after a poor sleep? Please feel free to put something in the chat box if you'd like to share. I know for myself, if I don't sleep well, I am moving at a slower pace in the morning. Things aren't as obvious to me. Some people are sharing a little bit, a slower reaction time. Perhaps our mood is affected, experiencing headaches. Perhaps if we're dealing with chronic pain, our pain hurts more. Unable to absorb information or process. Yeah. These are all really great responses and really goes to show how important a good night's sleep is, which I know can be hard when things like stress, pain, and other health challenges come in. So it turns out that sleep is vital for good memory retention and recall because memory and learning are processed during our sleep. So during sleep, our bodies release a human growth hormone, which allows for our brains to form new neural pathways. Almost literally, our brains are writing our memories while we sleep. Sleep is also vital for improving our decision-making and our problem-solving abilities. And this may be due to the fact that during sleep, our brain is so busy flushing out various waste products and giving the brain a good clean. There are many studies showing that when we don't get sufficient sleep, our cognition suffers, as many of you have mentioned too in the chat box there. So this means that we have poor short-term memory, attention, and processing speed. We don't just feel slower after a poor sleep, but we are actually slower. And you might remember back to our earlier discussion of the risk factors for dementia, and consistent poor quality sleep has been shown to be one of those risk factors. As we get older as well, being able to have a restorative sleep often becomes more difficult. There are many ways we can improve our sleep, and if you are not sleeping enough, it is important to try to find ways that work for you. And what works for you may work differently for me, depending on our history, our health status, our resources, and our bodies, or all of our bodies are so different. So there is a useful handout on sleep that I've included in general resources. So let me just pull that up and I'll put it in the chat box as well. And there's a lot of other links here on brain health that may be helpful for those of you who want to learn a little bit more. There you go, I just popped it in the chat. So a good night's sleep will help you feel motivated, as you can imagine, to exercise, to be social, to show up to work, to show up to an event we've committed to, and also to learn new things the next day. So try to aim for 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep on a regular basis with as much as possible consistent bedtime and wake times. This is what is called sleep hygiene, and that will look different for everybody. My father-in-law, he happens to only need 5 hours of sleep. He's able to function. That's just what works for him. But I can tell you right now that if I got 5 hours of sleep, I would not be my best self that particular day. So research has linked cardiovascular health, which I'm sure many of you are aware of and paying attention to in your own lives. So has linked cardiovascular health to dementia. Long-term healthy lifestyle choices may help reduce our risk of developing dementia. So in other words, what is good for your heart is also good for your brain or for your head in this situation. Our blood vessels, which is also called our circulatory system, carry blood throughout the body, delivering oxygen and nutrients to the body's tissues, including the brain, and carrying away waste. Having a healthy and cardiovascular system is obviously key to maintaining the health of all of our body's tissues, including our brain. So much of this you may have heard before, but hopefully we can learn some new information together today, or at least tie it to brain health in a way that maybe you haven't thought of before. So let's take a closer look at some of these lifestyle areas that may help keep your brain healthy. So I got a lot of questions, really, really great questions prior to this webinar about the role of nutrition and what is good to eat and what perhaps we should avoid. So in the broad category of nutrition, food is of course what first comes to mind. Foods associated with a Mediterranean diet show promise in health, in heart and brain health research, and may actually have a protective effect. So choosing a diet that is high in plant protein and thinking of the rainbow when selecting fruits and vegetables. So for example, picking red foods like beets, raspberries, and tomatoes, if you like them. Orange and yellow foods like grapefruit, squash, and peaches. When you think of green foods, think of avocados, broccoli, peas, and spinach. Be like Popeye. Blue and purple foods include blueberries, blackberries, and plums. And I don't know what it was about last year, but the natural blackberry bushes in my community were probably some of the best blackberries I've ever had. They were so good, and I'm so excited for that season to come about again. And don't forget the white, tan, and brown fruits and vegetables like bananas, potatoes, and turnips. So Canada's food guide has been updated recently. So especially if it's been some time since you've reviewed the recommendations, it may be helpful to check it out. So in that last link that I shared, there is a link to the Canada Food Guide website and helpful resources document. So take a look there. A healthy body weight is of tremendous benefit to both brain health and heart health, and that is less about some externally determined perfect weight and more about you finding your healthiest weight that you can maintain without adding stress to your life. Everybody's range of health will look different, so it's important to consult with your doctor if you're looking to make some lifestyle changes and perhaps are wanting to focus on your weight. Make water your drink of choice and drink as close to 8-ounce glasses of water per day as you can, especially in the summer. As we saw last year, the way that the heat affected us just encouraged us to drink more water. And it was so important to be on top of that and drinking as much water as possible as it was so hot in our environments. Water not only is helpful for keeping us hydrated physically, but it performs a number of important functions for our body and our brain. Trying to limit the amount of salt and sodium, alcohol, and caffeine you take into can affect your nutrition. So what can you do? You can also make conscious and safe choices to help maintain a healthy brain. So trying to avoid habits that harm your body and your brain. So examples include smoking, listening to music too loudly, which I am guilty of. I need to get better at that. Excessive drinking as well. This might be fun in the short term, but not in the long run. Trying to protect your head in situations that could cause risk for hurting your brain or hurting your head. So wearing a helmet if you're engaging in an intense physical activity like skating, skiing, skateboarding, rollerblading, or cycling, and setting a good example that children in your care are also wearing appropriate helmets. It can really make a huge difference. Because as we talked about earlier, head trauma is a risk factor for developing dementia. Assess the safety in the environment around you. So this may not necessarily be in our control, but do you work or live in an area where you are continually exposed to risks such as loud sounds or vehicle pollution? Does your home have handrails or grab bars installed that improve your accessibility or perhaps can prevent falls? By being aware of potential dangers in your environment, you can take some steps to counter them. So if you've ever had an occupational therapist come in and take a look at your environment, if you've been getting home support as an example, they may look for things that are fall hazards. So as an example, a high pile rug against a hardwood floor. I have one in my apartment, and it's often that I do a little trip over it. And so that's something that I would want to be aware about and make sure that I could perhaps modify that in some way so that I don't create an opportunity for me to trip and hurt myself. Seeing your doctor regularly. So this will help you address specific health concerns that you may have, including your diet, physical activity, mental health, and hearing evaluations. There is a growing evidence of research showing the link between hearing loss and dementia. So it may be helpful to help manage any hearing loss as early as possible if that's something that you can control. And I know that not everyone does have access to a family doctor, and I know that can be frustrating. So having opportunities to connect with nurse practitioners if you're not able to access a family doctor, or going to walk-in clinics as another example. So physical activity, it's one of the best things we can do for our brain. Physical activity increases our blood flow, which brings more oxygen and glucose to the brain, and that's our brain's fuel. Think of it like gasoline for our car. Oxygen and glucose, like I mentioned, are the two fuels that our brain needs to operate. Many people are curious about what type of exercise offers the greatest benefit for our brains. And the short answer is that the jury is still out, because our brains are complex and unique. And it may well be that at best exercise for myself may be different from Sarah, as an example. So there's a lot of individual variation, and it depends on your mobility, your resources, and also, most importantly, I would say your interests. What do you enjoy doing? So the latest Canadian physical activity guidelines are 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise in bouts of even just 10 minutes or more. So something that I've been trying to practice over the last little while as I've worked remotely at home is ensuring that I get up for at least a 15-minute walk every lunch break. And not only does that help me stretch my legs, improve my posture, but it also helps me reset to be able to go and continue working for the rest of the day and get some fresh air. They also suggest muscle and bone strengthening exercises 2 times a week. So whether that's a body weight exercise or using soup cans as you're watching TV, or dumbbells in your home, something that has some resistance to it. Limiting sedentary time to 8 hours a day or less if possible, and trying to break up long periods of sitting as often as possible. They also suggest no more than 3 hours of recreational screen time a day. And I know that hasn't always been possible, especially with COVID, when we were staying at home a lot more than perhaps we used to. So I really want to just enforce that it's important that exercise is enjoyable and not a chore. Otherwise, we won't want to do it. Having a friend who helps to keep you accountable can be helpful, and a great way to combine many of the tips that we're talking about today. So overall, the best exercise routine is one that you will do and that you will stick with, that challenges you, that inspires you, that provides opportunities for joy, and one that you want to keep doing. So those are just the list there. So here's some opportunities to share some examples in the chat, and I'll read some off as well. What are some ways that we can build physical activity into our daily routines? And I'll share a couple that I thought of, but as I said earlier, sharing your experiences may prompt someone else to think about that. So share what has been helpful for you and how you incorporate physical activity in your daily routines by putting it in a chat. Get a dog, yes. I got a dog actually a couple of years ago, and I can confirm it requires a lot more attention to my physical exercise. So as I mentioned, watching TV, you can grab soup cans or free weights and do arm exercises, taking the dog for a walk, getting off the bus early and walking a mile to work daily. That's a great way to break up your sitting time throughout your day. And you could even challenge your brain a little bit more by going a different route on the way home, as an example. Seated exercises like a stationary bike if mobility is an issue, or doing chair yoga as an example. It can be an incredibly effective and powerful workout, even sitting at your chair. Taking the stairs instead of the elevator or the escalator. In the springtime or summer, washing your car by hand instead of using the drive-through service. If you take the bus, getting off a stop earlier and walking the rest of the way. And in the chat, I'm seeing join a walking group. Yes, gardening. What a great way to get engaged. Get up every time TV with commercials. Another good prompt. Chair exercise, or even in the car while sitting at a red light. There you go. I heard someone the other day mention that they're on the bus, but at a stoplight, they'll do some mindfulness breathing exercises. Doing daily yoga, swimming, and walking. Great opportunities. I was also going to say joining a Minds in Motion program if that fits for you, or a Choose to Move program that the Active Aging Society supports. So social activity, this is such a huge part of our experience as a human and as an experience to keep our brains healthy and engaged. It's vitally important area for our brain to keep it in tip-top shape. So social activities keep you connected mentally, but they can also help reduce your stress. Persistent stress causes our bodies to release potentially damaging chemicals and can also lead to vascular changes that impact the brain. Symptoms of chronic stress may be treatable, so it's important to see your doctor if this is something that you're experiencing. But keeping physically and socially active are both things that are good for reducing stress and benefiting the brain. And while being social has been a challenge the last 2 years, and especially with the social distancing requirements, try to watch out for ways that you can increase your social activities. And when you get the chance to combine physical activity and socializing, like a walking group, as one participant mentioned, or dancing, if that's up your alley and you have rhythm, unlike me, it's twice the impact. So essentially 2 birds, 1 stone when you're socializing, laughing, and connecting and moving your body at the same time. So finding a way that movement speaks to you and that you can share with other people is a great way to keep your brain healthy and engaged. So back to stress. If we walk regularly in nature and give yourself time to do the things you enjoy doing, things that bring you joy, it can have a powerful impact on our levels of stress. So when stress persists over time, it causes vascular changes and chemical imbalances that are damaging to the brain and other cells in our body. So we know that some stress is part of everyday life and can be positive or negative. So how you manage it is important to your long-term health. By reducing the harmful effects of stress on your body, you can improve your brain health and you may reduce your risk of developing dementia. You can reduce the harmful effects of stress on your mind and body through meditation, deep breathing, massage, or physical exercise. How you manage your stress will be very individualized, and what works for one person may not work for another. My partner recently hurt his back, and so through his physio, he was encouraged to do some stretching, which encouraged deep breaths. And I started doing it alongside him for support and also just to help my posture. And we both just looked at each other afterwards and said how much better we feel even after 10 minutes of stretching and deep breathing. So finding something that speaks to you and that you can manage. It'd be great to hear of some other ways that people manage their stress if you'd like to put that in the chat as well. And as we mentioned, exercise is one of those ways. Yoga, yeah. Pilates, getting into nature. If you have a green space, it can really change your perspective. You can also try to challenge yourself by naming flowers or plants or birds as an example. Journaling, yeah, reflecting is important. Reading a good book, music. Sarah said gardening, yes. These are all great ways, and you can see there's a variety, and this may be your go-to, but maybe there's another thing that you could incorporate to help reduce your stress that is listed in the chat there. Thinking positive, so our mindset for sure. So telling jokes has been described as a form of brain training, and humor may help to lower blood pressure and reduce stress. It may well be that laughter really is the best medicine. So whether you're watching your favorite comedian do stand-up, reading a funny book, or listening to a funny podcast, doing laughing yoga, which was an option at my university many, many years ago, and I've heard out in the community as well, or spending time with a friend that just cracks you up. Laughing is an important part of keeping our brains healthy. And I don't know if, think about the last time that you really laughed. And how present were you in that moment? Were you thinking about what you need to make for dinner? Were you thinking about the laundry that needs done? It's such an in the moment experience. So finding opportunities to do that is wonderful. Funny movies, yes. So we're nearing the end of our presentation, but I just wanted to highlight some things before we wrap up. Taking care of your brain health is so important, as we've discussed, as our brain controls and supports every aspect of our being. It's one of our most vital organs, and it is involved in every single action and every single thought that we do. So even though we can't physically see our brain, it needs to be looked after and exercised just like our muscles. By following these tips and strategies, you're not only reducing your risk of dementia, but you're also looking after your long-term brain health and reducing your risk of other cognitive and chronic diseases and protecting your overall health. So we have come to the end of today's presentation, and I really would just like to say such a huge thank you to Sarah and the Active Aging Society team today for hosting me and the Alzheimer Society. And I'd be really, really curious to see what is one key piece of information or a takeaway that stood out for you during today's workshop. So you're welcome to put that in the chat. Love to see what rang true for you today. The video, yeah, it's powerful images in that degree that shows us a little bit more about something that we're trying to learn about. Modifications, yes. Starting small, everyone. You don't have to do this all at once. It can be small changes over time. Sleep patterns. We do have control over our health. Yes, in many ways, we have influence. Great, this is wonderful. Well, before we go on to the Q&A, I do want to make time for that. I would just like to invite everyone, if you would like, to stay connected to the Alzheimer Society and to others who share many of the feelings and experiences that we have through our phone calls with our staff, support groups, and other education workshops and programs like Minds in Motion. And I just want to say as well, all of our programs provide a safe place to share your questions, concern, and experience. So to find out more about more support programs, call the First Link Dementia Helpline, and let me just put that in the chat again before we hop into the Q&A time.
Sounds great, Morgan. Thank you for such a clear presentation. I think you hit on all the topics people wanted to hear today, and yeah, for all the visuals and the engagement. I mean, it was super fun to see everybody participating in the chat, and thank you for putting together such a wonderful presentation. So yeah, so we have our Q&A now, and I took some notes throughout your presentation. A few questions came up that I'm going to add to the list that we curated from what came in through the registration pages. And are you ready to go, Morgan? Are you ready for some Q&A?
I'm just going to take a quick sip of water and then I'll be ready.
Okay, we'll give Morgan a little break here. And Rebecca's just noting here in the chat that the video is going to be available, not the slides specifically, but there were a number of resources that Morgan had mentioned. She had shared in the chat the different lines accessible to different languages will also be shared in the follow-up email. So not to worry, you will have a lot of resources and supports coming into your inbox. And of course, if there was something specific missing, drop us a line on our email or through Morgan, and we'll follow up. We'll get you what you need. Yeah. So Morgan, I thought that this was a really important question posed in the chat, just as you were presenting on caregivers and care partners and what kinds of supports the Alzheimer's Society provides, you know, for neighbors, for friends who've just been diagnosed, for spouses, parents. What could you tell us about the programs that you offer for care partners?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I appreciate how there may be some caregivers or care partners attending this workshop today. So not only does the Alzheimer's Society provide support groups, but under our program of First Link, we have one-on-one support calls. And so what that looks like is we would connect with you, either myself or one of my other amazing colleagues, every 3 to 6 months, where we check in with you to see how things are going, to explore your situation. We can do some navigation navigational support, whether that's involving home support with the health authority or accessing other services in your community, and have some suggestions that you could explore. So that's one area, and you do not need a formal referral for that. So you can simply call the dementia helpline number and share a little bit about what's been going on for you or the person you're supporting, and get connected to that ongoing phone and follow-up support. There's a lot of different support groups that we have offered, and during COVID, we have altered our programming a bit to be more virtual, and we are starting some in-person support groups now and over the next course of the few months. And it would be a really great idea for you to get connected if you feel like that would be beneficial for you. A lot of the groups are provincial, so there may be people in all pockets throughout the province that are going through something just as similar as you are, or can provide some support and information about something in a bi-directional way. So there are some support groups that are specifically geared towards certain populations, like adult children, as an example, because we recognize that that experience caring for a parent is a little bit different than caring for a friend or a family member. Or a spouse rather. We also have early stage support groups. So if you are a caregiver and you're supporting someone who's living with a form of dementia in the early stages, and they want to connect to other people who are going through a similar situation, that is an opportunity as well. So connecting through the dementia helpline is a great starting point, and we'd be happy to explore options for you. And then of course, our webinars are another great way to get information and support. And oftentimes there are little opportunities to have chats in the discussion box, kind of like we did today, to feel a little bit less alone in this journey.
Oh, thank you, Morgan. And as somebody who has been alongside, or as somebody who has journeyed alongside someone diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, the supports that your society has offered care partners has been critical, even in just navigating the health system and knowing where to go and who to ask, and having that follow-up support has been so key. So I hope that Morgan's responses there addressed your questions, or the questions that were posed there in the chat earlier on. Morgan, there was a lot of questions around sleeping too much, or the role of sleeping pills. Did you want to say anything more about sleep and its role?
Yeah, I would. I know that that comes up a lot for people because we've just gone through and are still going through a pandemic, and there's a lot of other global issues that are impacting us that can cause stress in our lives. And I know for myself, when I'm stressed, my sleep is the first thing to be affected. So I appreciate how that concern comes up. And I do want to just say as well, like I said earlier, that your sleep patterns and what works for you may be different, but trying as best as possible to create a sleep environment, whether it's putting blackout blinds, getting an extra fan if that's what you need, sleeping with earplugs, winding down with screen time a couple hours before bed, or doing a stress reducing exercise like journaling or reading, as an example, are really great ways and actionable ways that you can take control or try to take control over the role that sleep plays in your life. In terms of medications, I'm not a doctor or a psychiatrist, so I can't speak too much on that. But for many people, that can be a way for them to access a longer term sleep, perhaps for a short time, and it may help them. So I think it's important to explore options with your doctor and be very honest about your concerns, and explore the risks and the benefits of perhaps taking a medication as an example, and making that decision together. But at this point in time, there's no causal link from taking a sleep medication or an antidepressant that would cause Alzheimer's disease or any form of dementia. And I did just want to say there's a lot of really great questions about research, and there's so much research going on. And so I'm just going to put in the chat box, every year the UBC Clinic for Alzheimer's and Related Disorders puts a really great symposium on, and they have different researchers local in the province that are sharing an update on where we're at with what we know about dementia. So I'm just going to find the link here, because I know that when I attended that in the past, I learned a wealth of information, and I don't know if they'll be having it in May 2020 this year as they normally do, but you can watch previous recordings, including last year's webinar. So I'll put that in the chat if anyone is interested in learning a little bit more about where we're at with research on dementia at this point in time.
That's fantastic, Morgan. And thanks for just clarifying. You're not a clinician. You can't diagnose on this call today. I think we all appreciate that and understand that, and that you can't speak specifically to certain interventions. And I really appreciate you sort of guiding us to finding the right solutions and resources, and that expert advice for our own personal circumstances. We did have a number of people query around access to a family doctor, and you mentioned it briefly in your presentation. Do you have any guidance for people who are without a family doctor right now, who are concerned that they're maybe not getting the continuity of care that they might need for their brain health or other health issues?
Yeah, I really empathize with folks that are trying to find a family doctor. I know it's a problem not only in larger cities like Vancouver, but in remote communities as well. And, you know, at the Alzheimer Society, oftentimes we redirect some of these specific questions to a family doctor. So I hear those who are frustrated. And so I would like to say that usually the divisions of family practice across the province have a kind of a program where they can support and perhaps connect you with a family doctor. So I would encourage you to search up your local division if possible, and as well as being open to walk-in clinics, and sometimes they will take you on as a patient. Another strategy that people have shared with me is asking their friends or family members if specifically they can ask their doctor if they could take you on. So I know it's hard, but trying to find ways, advocating for yourself. In the Alzheimer Society, we can help work with you on some advocacy strategies with that as well. But being open perhaps to a nurse practitioner if a family doctor isn't an option, maybe another way for you to get some referrals and more continuity with your care.
Yeah, those are really, really great suggestions. So the divisions of family practice in your area, I really like that suggestion too, of connecting up with a neighbor or family member who is already linked to a family doctor and asking for that referral. That's really helpful. I want to just change gears a little bit, and certainly we're very interested in the role of physical activity and being social and connected to community activities. Can you talk to me, or can you share a little bit about brain health activities that you would suggest for maybe somebody who's experiencing some mobility disability or is a bit limited in their mobility? And any tips to stay motivated or engaged in those activities, just based on who you see coming through your doors?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I also appreciate that in the last 2 years, we've probably moved a little bit less, or we haven't been going to our regular programs because they've been shut down or at reduced capacity. So for some of us right now, we may be re-engaging in previous activities, and how intimidating that may be if you're comparing yourself to where you were before. But starting something, whether that is something more lower activity like a chair exercise, it really is amazing. I've done a couple of them a few times, and I always walk away feeling lighter and my back straighter and just feeling more connected to myself. So you can get a great workout if you do have some mobility considerations sitting at home, whether it's on a chair or a couch as an example, or following along on an online program and going at your own pace. So maybe you can pause it if you need to take a bit of a break. Other activities include swimming, which are really great for our joints. And I know that the aquafit programs are quite popular for a lot of folks. And it's a really great low, or it's a resistance training activity, but really supportive for the joints, as I mentioned. So also, I think it's important, if you do have a goal and there's something that's been at the back of your mind that you're wanting to start up again, perhaps sharing that plan with a friend or family member to encourage you and help, motivate you or accompany you to these programs. Or if you are isolated and you don't have that many people around you, checking in with your local community center or Better at Home program. They're all throughout British Columbia. Oftentimes they have friendly visiting programs, and they may provide an opportunity for you to engage with someone that checks in on you and shares conversation with you, and perhaps you could share your goals with them. But I also know the Choose to Move program is a great option to engage and set some goals and get some support. So I'd actually love to hear from you, Sarah, more about that.
Yeah, I mean, as I had mentioned in the chat, as we were talking, or as you were posing some questions around ways of keeping active, and you had made a couple comments on how important it is to personalize your physical activity routines and goals, so that you stick with it, so that you're motivated to stick with it, and that's really at the heart of Choose to Move. Is the program is centered on supporting individuals to identify their goals, set up an action plan, navigate the resources and opportunities in their community. We know, just like individuals, not every community comes in different shapes and sizes, has different strengths and different ways of engaging their constituents. So the Choose to Move really is, as a program, tailored to their community, and then for each participant, tailored to the interests of each participant. We see a lot of our Choose to Move participants networking with others in the program, so building some social support, maybe taking on, navigating the swimming pool and how, figuring out how to get there, and the public swim times with somebody that they've met through the program. Or, if they choose gardening as an activity that they like to get involved in, they receive support from their activity coach to find ways of accessing community gardens. And maybe they meet a new friend through the Gardening Society, or, they share a gardening box with somebody they hadn't yet met from their community. So really building in that social support, hopefully maybe having some of those deep belly laughs in the process. So I think, just to underscore that, seeking out those activities that you like to do, that you will commit to doing, and finding that social support to do them. So again, in our follow-up, we will include our upcoming programs for Choose to Move. Many folks on the line here have been previous participants, but for those who haven't, we'd love to include you in our future program. Morgan, I have a really thoughtful question from someone who has a friend who's just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. This friend is in their early stages, and this person wants to know, how can they support their friend in their journey?
I'm so glad to hear that question, because whether it's big or small, everyone can do something to support people living with dementia and helping to reduce stigma throughout our dementia-friendly communities. So I would say, first and foremost, you attending this workshop today is such a great way for you to not only learn information to keep yourself well, but perhaps things that you can help translate and experience with your friend. Helping them feel connected to a community, whether that's between the two of you, or encouraging them or supporting them in attending other activities like Choose to Move, if that's something that they're looking forward to, is a great way to provide support. It's also important that not everyone wants to talk about their diagnosis. So they may share with you in confidence that this is something they're going through, but their own reaction to their diagnosis may be quite personal, and it may change over time. So they may look for some normalcy in your relationship with you. They may want to just go on your walks as you normally did without mentioning the A word, as an example. And that's okay. So asking them and checking in with them and looking for them for a guidance as to where they're at with this and what can you do, if anything at all, and offering chances to provide support without just giving it and assuming that support is required. Also, if that person is interested in attending information, but perhaps is a little overwhelmed or maybe needs some tech support, if you're able to help provide that platform for them to log into these webinars to learn a bit more, or attend one of our programs like Shaping the Journey, which is a 5-part series designed for someone living in the early stages with dementia and a care partner, whether that is a friend or family member. So creating a community around them and letting them know that they're not alone. One of our campaigns for Alzheimer's Awareness Month in January was Don't Change. So don't stop visiting, don't stop calling, don't stop going fishing if that was your thing that you did. Continuing these routines and making adaptations as necessary over time, and just honoring that person in your relationship. Just because dementia is in the picture doesn't mean that has to stop. Things may just look different, and your support for them is huge as they experience those changes.
Thanks, Morgan. I think that your response should really get at the heart of what the person was asking, and being that solid support, not assuming that people want to talk about the A word, and helping support some normalcy. It's so key. So we're nearing the end. I see a number of people dropping off. I saw us up to 255 at one point. So great and wonderful to have those who are still with us. And I have two more questions.
Sure.
One is going to be on community supports, those who are providing seniors services, and one is going to be on stigma and reducing stigma around dementia. And so let's start with the community supports. I know we have a number of people here who are working in the community-based senior service sector, working for organizations that offer programs for seniors, whether it's a neighborhood house or a senior center. And what sort of advice would you give those organizations, even municipal rec centers? What sort of advice would you give those service providers when they consider the inclusivity of their programs and how they're engaging with people who are living with dementia or Alzheimer's disease?
That's a really great question. Inclusivity is at the key to my heart, and I know how it can feel on a personal level to feel like you're not connected to something because of some sort of barrier. So a lot of times people living with dementia look physically normal, and so there may not be a physical cue to perhaps show you that maybe the way that information is being communicated is too stimulating, too overwhelming, or perhaps they need a bit more time to digest that information. So I would say one of the best things to do would be to learn a little bit more about dementia, and how you can tailor some of your communications so that not only is it easier for people living with cognitive impairment to understand, but other people with different challenges as well, whether it's hearing loss or perhaps they've had other experiences in their life where they appreciate a different approach, because communication is much more than just the words that are coming out of my mouth. It's my body language, it's my eye contact, it's my tone of voice. It's all of these things at once. And so not assuming that just because you're connecting with someone that looks physically fine, that they aren't perhaps experiencing something that could be changing the way that they interact with you. One of the big things with dementia is feeling isolated, because an environment like a rec center perhaps has music going on and the basketball's dribbling next door and there's coffee being grinded at the little cafeteria, that environment may be too overwhelming for a brain that has some changes going on for it. Or conversations may be more challenging for people. So if they attended a pottery class, as an example, having that conversation with someone, if they're forgetting the words that they said, or they have some aphasia and they can't express what they would like to say, can lead to feelings of feeling othered or isolated. And so people may actually take a step back from some of their activities, when, as we just discussed, engaging in these activities is such an important way to keep healthy, regardless of if you have some experience living with dementia. Looking into person-centered language when promoting information. So saying somebody living with dementia, not a person with dementia. They are living with dementia. They are much more than their disease. They're so much more than just that experience of having these changes. So being mindful of that, and the Alzheimer Society has a lot of information on our website on how to tailor language to be more supportive and inclusive for people living with dementia. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, it absolutely does. And at the Active Aging Society, through Choose to Move, we really like to take that whole picture approach to an individual's experience. So it's the networks that they have socially with their family and friends, it's the opportunities in their community, it's the higher level policies happening at provincial and national levels that really shape, and municipal levels that really shape what's happening on the ground and what's available. And so I think it's just really helpful to think through what organizations that engage seniors can do. And with an aging demographic, more and more we're going to need to figure out how to support a diversity of older adults across many different decades, across many different languages and cultures, and with a variety of different experiences in terms of health and mobility. So I will just pose one last question. We've got about a minute and a half left. Maybe you wanted to comment a bit on stigma. I feel like you addressed it a little bit in your last response, but any comments on reducing stigma for people who have been diagnosed with and who are living with Alzheimer's and dementia?
Yeah, it's a really big thing to unpack because it's woven through so much of our society. But I would say, and this kind of goes back to the previous question you posed, Sarah, is if you know one person living with dementia, you know one person, and don't assume that just because that person's experience looked a certain way, that everyone will look a certain way. And this reigns true specifically for people who are diagnosed with young onset dementia. So maybe they're still working, maybe they're still, maybe they have young children or children who are in high school. They may not look physically any different from anybody else, but they could be experiencing some significant changes and maybe quite overwhelmed with the fact that they don't fit the typical mold, perhaps, of what others in society think dementia looks like, or who it can happen to, as an example. So dementia does not discriminate across languages, cultural groups, locations, but as we talked about, there's lots of risk factors going on. So with regards to stigma, I think having open, honest conversations, and the Alzheimer Society does a really good job of that. And I'm so grateful for your organization too, to be hosting this so we can have some conversations about this. And using appropriate language is key, as I mentioned. Sharing people's stories and people with lived experience, if they are comfortable sharing what it's like for them, so we can learn from them and we can adapt in a lot of ways to our language, our promotion, how we connect with other people. They may not be able to change everything, but we can. And so we have a wonderful amount of advocates, part of our working groups with lived experience, that do presentations to doctors in the community. There's an amazing group of folks that are just so, I just admire them so much. And I appreciate their perspective, because as much as I can learn and talk and share about dementia, I don't have that lived experience. So we need to lean on other people's for sharing that if they're comfortable.
Thank you so much, Morgan, for closing us off on those final comments. Thank you to everybody in the chat who is signing off and expressing their gratitude to Morgan for her very clear, professional, informative presentation. Morgan, please extend a big thank you to your colleagues at the Alzheimer Society. We're so grateful that you have an engagement commitment and are able to respond to requests to come out and speak on such an important topic. Please stay tuned to Choose to Move for our upcoming programs. Stay connected through our newsletter. Reach out to Morgan through the services she mentioned. And I really look forward to seeing you next time. We'll be hosting a webinar on transportation with TransLink later in April. And we'll see you all back here then. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. We promise to follow up in due course.
Thank
Take
you all
really
so
good care.
much.
Bye.
Bye.